If you've been around for a while, you've definitely seen float-based layouts, and if you're new to this world of CSS, you might have seen a lot of tutorials that look at how to use floats to create layouts. Now, I have a lot of them here on my own channel back from when I first started. Now, well, looking up stuff, you might have run into other tutorials that look at things like Flexbox or Grid, and you might be wondering, what is going on? Am I supposed to use floats? What about Flexbox? And I've been hearing a lot about Grid lately. What's the deal? What's actually going on? In this video, I'm going to be looking at all three of these. I'm going to be looking at which one you should use in what situation, what they're really for, and, for when it comes to creating layouts, what the best choice is today. So my name is Kevin, and here at my channel we learn how to make the web and how to make it look good with weekly tips, tricks, and tutorials. Now, a while back I came across an article on Medium by Peter Jang called Modern CSS Explained for Dinosaurs. Really awesome article, so I've linked to that down in the description below because it's what inspired me to make this video here today. And even if you're watching this and even if that inspired me to make this, I'd encourage you to go and check it out because it's really well done, it's well written, there's lots of cute pictures of dinosaurs, which I sadly don't have in this video. I love the article so much, I reached out to Peter and asked him if I could make a video based on what he talked about there, and he said, yes, so this is what we're doing today. So it's a heavy inspiration from his article, but I've put in my own opinions into this as well, and sort of fleshed out a few things that I thought were important. So we're going to look at what floats are, why we even use them ever for layouts, and what we're actually supposed to be using them for. We're going to see what Flexbox came in and did to change the game a little bit, and then we'll eventually get to Grid and how the whole grid system and everything like that works, and how it evolved. We're sort of the evolution from one to the next along the way. Now, one thing is, I'm going to be looking at floats, I'm going to be looking at Flexbox, and I'm going to be looking at Grid. I'm not doing a tutorial on how these work. I'm going to be using them to create some things, just to show up some fast stuff that they can do, but I'm not going to be going, okay, and this is how this property in Grid works. I have in-depth tutorials on Flexbox and Grid already, so if that's what you're interested in, check the description down below where you will find more information on those, or watch through this video, and if there's things that sort of grab your interest, then you can go and check out the links that might help you out on those. Now, one thing I won't be talking about is table-based layouts, even though that's where we were before floats. Just those bring back some really bad nightmares and stuff. I remember those days. If you don't, be very happy that you don't. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's get started. Alright guys, so before getting started into the nitty-gritty of this, I just want to say that I am in CodePen, so the link to this is down in the description below. And also, I am going to be using Sass a little bit for this, but it's just to make it easier for me to have nested elements, just so I didn't have to have different class names everywhere for everything. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to stay a bit organized and have everything in one document. Even if you've never used Sass or you've never even heard of Sass, it will still be easy for you to follow along, so it shouldn't cause any issues. So we're going to start with floats, and we're going to be looking at what floats are, and then we'll get into more. But first of all, why do we have floats? Why do floats even exist? One other thing that I just want to say is I have put a whole bunch of CSS in here to start with. It doesn't really matter. It's just making certain things look good on the page right now. It's nothing to do with the tutorial itself. So here in my float intro is where we're going to be starting, which is right here where I just have a little bit of stuff. So we can see it here on the screen. So why do we even have floats? What were floats created for? And one thing that's important to know is they're never intended to be a layout tool. They were created for one specific purpose, and it was to wrap text around images. So here in my float intro, I have my image, and say we do a float left on there, then I get my text wrapping up around it like that. And maybe we'd want a little margin on the right of say 1em, just to give us a bit of space on that. So just very quickly, if you've never seen or used Sass, I can nest things in like this. If you're writing regular CSS, you cannot do this. If I come and look at the compiled CSS of this, what that's doing is, where are we? Body section. Here, it's creating a float intro space img. So it's my image inside of the float intro there. So I'm going to be doing that a little bit along the way, but it should be easy enough to follow along with. So there we go. This is what they were intended for. So I can do that on the left or on the right. And this was coming back to the days of print. In the days of print, having text wrap around images like this was quite common. So they wanted to bring that possibility into the world of web, and what they came up with was floats. Now with floats, you can have multiple items floating, and they just pretty much mean one will go one after the other. So here in my multiple floats, each one of these boxes, let's just go look here in my markup, just has a class of float on it. So if I do a float left on that, they'll all just go one next to each other. And if there's enough room, or if there's not enough room, they stack on top of each other like that. So we can have multiple things floating, and then if we had text here, it would just sort of fill into the empty space that was there. Some clever people soon realized that because you could float anything you wanted, we weren't limited to floating just images like what was originally intended. Because we could float anything we wanted, in doing so, we could start to make some layouts. And when your alternative to building a layout is tables, like had been normal practice, you'd take it even if it's a flawed solution. So before we get into the real, the downsides of everything here, let's just come and look at my float layout 1. So I have a background on this. So in here, I just have a column, column, and column. So if I look at each one of those columns, first I'm going to give them a width. So part of it was having to give things widths to make them smaller. And then there's enough room for everything, but because these are display block, they can't go next to each other. So then I could do a float left on them. And look, they're going to work, but oh man, what just happened to my background? So this is the type of flaw that could come up. So that's, to me, a really big flaw. And we'd have to use things like clears to get around that. And they actually had to come up with sort of a hacky thing. And this whole thing to begin with is kind of hacky. Margin right of, say, 2 or 3% we could get away with, just to spread those out a bit. So yeah, it is hacky in general to be floating things, to be making columns like this, but it worked. So we did it, and then we had this issue. So to fix that, we use something called the clear fix. So it would be dot. A lot of the time you'll see CF for clear fix, or just clear or clear fix. And then we could come in here and say that the clear fix is a display table is usually what you'd find, or it's not even clear fix. It'd be this after. Display, I haven't done one in so long, I forgot it had to be the after. Display table content we needed to have, and then a clear both on there. And then you'd come and add this onto anything you needed, and it would always be added to the parent. So effectively what this is doing is it's adding a pseudo element after, so after all the content that would be in here, I want to add a pseudo element. So it'll be inside my green box, but after all of this, and it's going to create a clear, which is going to make and fix this whole background issue. So let's go and do that. Float layout 1, clear fix. That will refresh the whole page. So I just have to scroll down, and you can see that fixes the issue right there. There's other solutions too that can also deal with that, but that sort of became the standard for that I've seen used the most anyway. Now this is just a simple 3-column layout, and with the clear fix we could come up with solutions for that. And actually, before we keep going, let's add my clear fix right away to layout 2, because it's going to give us the same type of issue. So if we come and look at the layout 2, we could actually make complete layouts. So here I have my whole thing set up. So I have a sidebar left, I have my main, and I have my sidebar right. So we look at this and I do a sidebar left. I could say this has a width, let's say 25%, and a float left. And there we go. It gives room for this. You get this sort of weird stuff going on. So then I'd have to go to my, and what you'd try and do sometimes is something like sidebar right, width 25%, float right. And then, whoa, that's weird, right? And it's because this part isn't floating. And even though I want this to go up here, I need this to give it room to be able to fit. So that's kind of awkward. So then I'd have to come on my main and do a width of 50% and a float left on it, so things could actually come up and it won't wrap underneath. But then look at my footer. My footer's really bad. So then I'd have to come onto my footer, and on my footer I'd have to do a clear both. And then I get this annoying issue of, look at that, my sidebars are longer than my main area here, so I get this white space. There's ways of getting around that, and there's different things you could do, but we just had issues overall. There was lots of problems with creating float-based layouts, since that's not what they were intended for. So we constantly had to use little hacks and fixes and things to try and fix the problems that were coming up, even though they weren't technically problems. It was just us breaking things to begin with and not using things as they were intended. And one last thing that was the most infuriating thing I ever ran into when using floats was here on my layout 3. These are all little cards, and you can see this one has a different picture on it. And watch this. These are all just dot card. I'm going to do a float left, and something really weird is going to happen. They're all lining up next to each other, but this area here is empty. You'd expect these to be tucked into this space, but they're not. The reason for this is this picture is 1 pixel taller than these other pictures. And because it's 1 pixel taller, that means this whole box is 1 pixel longer. It's imperceivable, but it's 1 pixel taller, which means this can wrap into this space. So this is actually the 4th card, and then it's number 5 and 6 falling over here. To make it more obvious what's going on, I'll make this one a lot bigger. Let's just make it a height of like 301. And this is Unsplash. I get a lot of questions about it. You can't normally do this with pictures, but the Unsplash it image placeholders, this is the width and the height if ever you want to use them. So now you can see that there is like this space here that this can tuck into. So because that space is there, this image doesn't go here because it's going to go, because of the way the whole float thing works anyway. It's trying to go after this one. So after this one, well, it can sneak into this area here, so it's going to go there. Then the next one can't fit next to it, so it wraps down onto here, and then we start getting a normal flow again. Really, really, really infuriating. You actually had to make like a row and then a row and then a row. So if the amount of cards changed or something, or the height of something changed, it could cause some issues along the way. Especially if you wanted it to be like 2, then 3, then 4 at different screen sizes. It could be really, really annoying. And then of course you get the whole clear fix issue where these are sticking out the bottom of my box as well, which is really, really annoying. So this is where Flexbox, I'm just going to turn these floats off so we don't have to deal with it. Flexbox came in and started solving some of these issues. Flexbox was the first attempt in CSS to actually give us a tool to create layouts. Well, not really layouts. It's far from perfect, but it fixes a lot of the issues that we had. It wasn't created to make layouts. It was created to make columns or rows. That's really different from layouts. Layouts involve having rows and columns. So we're going to get there a little bit later, but it was the first time we're like, okay, people want to make columns a lot. Let's make it so people can actually make columns pretty much, or rows. It fixes a lot of the issues that we had we don't have to be hacky anymore. We can just create columns quite easily. So to start here, what we're going to do is we're going to look at using our Flex for layout, but with only 3 cards. So it's exactly the same as above, but they're all the same size. But just to get a rough idea of how this helped fix things. Now, one thing that was a little bit different with this, if I come and look at the markup, we had to create something like a flex parent. It didn't have to be called flex parent. I'm just using that for demo purposes right now. But we needed something because flex doesn't work. Floats work by floating the children. Flex works because the children get turned into flex items by the parent. So on here, I would come and do a display flex. So this is going to turn the children into flex items, and they're going to fit next to each other. Right now, these actually have a width on them. But if I look at this, and I'll just come into this one specifically, and I do my card, width of initial. So it's going to reset the width to what they originally were. There's no, I'll even put it to 100% just to show you. Even though the cards have a width of 100% on them here, they're not getting changed. They're actually fitting next to each other like this. And just to show you, if I turn this off, you can see they actually have a width of 100% on them, but because they're flex children, they're going to make columns and they're going to fit next to each other like that. So it solved an issue that we had with dealing with widths and getting things to squeeze in and fit next to each other. It made our lives much, much easier for that. So if we come and look at this one, which is exactly the same as what we had before, and I'm actually going to copy you into here. So we can see they're all at 100%. So if I came onto this and I did display flex, they all squeeze in next to each other like that. So they're all just sort of like jamming into the space. Now that might not be exactly what we want. So let's actually come on to here and change these widths back to 33%. Or I think I had them as 30% actually, so we could have some margins on them. And then on here, I'm going to go on do a flex wrap of wrap. I want to tell it that these items should actually be wrapping down underneath. And look at that. They all line up. They're actually, this isn't causing any issues, even though this one is 1 pixel taller. There's no problem with the layout. The layout is just working, which is really, really nice. And this is the case where this is actually dictating how big they should be now. And you don't necessarily have to use a width. There's other, or this should be like 40, 48, I guess, or 47. There we go. So we could use media queries to sort of switch things around. We could also, instead of using width, you'd probably be using flex. We'd probably also want to be using flex bases like that, but I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of the difference between those right now. Just to keep it simple, we'll stick with width. So I could have a media query saying at one size it's 100, then at the next media query they switch over to 50, and then at the next one they switch over to 30. And my layouts are going to work, and even this could become 20, and then I get more. You know, it could really be very flexible in how it works, hence the name Flexbox. The nice thing about this too is it is responsive, so as my columns are changing size, like it's going to adapt to the content and make things fit because it's squeezing things and just getting them to work. So that's really, really nice and handy. And one last thing we could do also on this is switch the direction. So flex direction to column. And they're going to line up the other way. So I'm making rows now instead of columns. Again, that could be really useful for a media query along the way at one point, switching those back and forth. But again, Flexbox is making rows or columns. It cannot make both at the same time. So Flexbox wins, right? Over floats for sure. 100% Flexbox is 100. You definitely, if you have a choice between the two, go Flexbox. Browser support these days has reached, it's probably about 98% the last time I checked, which is amazing. Do double check who's visiting your site. I'm going to talk more about that in another video, as I said though. But Flexbox is a really awesome tool and a big improvement over floats. But as I said, it's not a true layout system. It's made for, I can make a column here, and I'm not really getting into the nitty gritty. There's lots of really cool things we can do. We can easily center vertically with Flexbox. There's other things it does wonderfully. So it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. But wait, what about Grid? Well, Grid is the newest layout option we have with CSS, and it solves even more issues than Flexbox does. It allows us to work in 2 dimensions. So Flexbox is only for a row or only for a column, and Grid lets us play with both of them. That means we can create layouts with a lot less markup. It's really incredible. You can skip having container divs and other things. For me, it's been a game changer, and a lot of other people have been sharing the same sentiment. Remember, this isn't a tutorial on how to use Grid. I have other videos on those, and there's links to those down in the bottom. I just want to show you the basics of how it can work. So the first example, we're going to use these exact same cards, and I want to show you how amazing this is, and it even lets us use less media queries. I remember when I saw this type of thing used for the first time, it blew my mind. So my cards are set to a width of 100% right now, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set my grid parent to have a display of grid. And I said there you need less markup, so if we come and look at my markup here, I've made, whoops, that's the wrong one. I have made a grid parent in this case for this demo, but you could literally put display grid on your body if you're using it for your layout of your whole page. You can do less with, you don't need as much markup as we used to, but in this case I have an equivalent amount of markup. So when I do display grid, nothing actually changes, and that's because I need to set up my grid template columns and rows. So for the moment, I'm going to set up my columns. I'm just going to do one FR, which is an awesome unit, and I'll explain it a little bit in a second. So look at that. You can see that they've come and they've made a little grid system right here. Now these cards clearly have no space between them or anything like that. So I could come in and say grid, 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 not grip, grid, gap, 1M. And look, there's a gap on the tops and bottoms. Or I can make that 3 and it's going to make them bigger, or I can make it 0.5 and it's going to make it smaller, and it's doing this way and it's doing that way. And oh my goodness, it's so, so nice. Now here I'm repeating the same thing over and over again. So what this has done is it's created a column of 1FR, 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 which pretty much means it's one fraction. So take a fraction of the empty space or available space, and that's the width of this one. So I could come on this and say this one's 2, and it won't be double the size. Well, it looks double the size. Sometimes it might not be exactly double because it's using available space, which is a bit different than just overall total space. So I could do something like that, and if I wanted to, then I could take this one and make it a 3. So that's pretty cool, right? And even with my grid template rows, I could do 1FR, 2FR, and now this row is twice as tall as that one. So I think that's pretty cool. So I can control the height of my rows, and I can control the width of my columns really, really easily. I'm going to take this row one off for the moment and revisit this, because a lot of the time you might have something where they're all the same. So 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. And if it's like that, we can use the repeat. So I'm going to do repeat 3, 1FR. So it's exactly the same thing. It's saying repeat 3 times 1FR, so I don't have to rewrite it each time. And just to really do something fun, and this is what blew my mind, I'm going to use the autofit keyword. So autofit. So what autofit does is it goes, instead of saying repeat 3 times, repeat 2 times, repeat 6 times, it's going to repeat as many times as it needs to fit something. And then there's the really cool min-max size that can only work with grid for the moment. I'm hoping this gets expanded out to other things. And just for this, let's try like 200 pixels, 1FR. And watch what's going to happen here. Right now I have 2 by 2. And they have a minimum width. Now I have 1 by 1. They're just stacking one on top of each other. Because what happened is, right here, I can fit, this is 200 pixels and 200 pixels. So there's room for those two to fit next to each other and be a width of 200 pixels each. But if this gets smaller than that, there's not enough room for it to be 200 pixels. It jumps from its minimum size, and it can allow it to get up to a maximum size of whatever the available space is. So here, it's going to keep moving because I have other content on my page. But at one point, there we go, it's going to break into 3 automatically. And then I'm going to keep going. If I had room, it would eventually get to 4 across and 5 across as the space becomes available for it. So without any media queries, I can just create something super easy and super wonderful like that. It's really, really, really awesome to do stuff like that. And then just as one last example for an actual layout, like we looked at before, here I'll come back to my, let's go and look at the markup. So this one, I'm just going to do, I don't have a grid parent, so display grid right on there. And on this one, let's do grid template columns, 1FR, 4FR, and I wouldn't really be using FRs like this. I'd probably be using min-max to set things up. And I start getting my layout, but you can see it's really, really broken. But we can really easily fix this. I can go and look at my title, and I want this to have a grid column, so I can tell it where they should fit on it. I want it to start at 1 and go to -1. So these are my line numbers. So it's starting at line 1, which is the first line right here. And I could actually count. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Does that make sense? 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I put 1 over 4, it should look exactly the same. So start at line 1 and end at line 4. But we can also work backwards. So this is -1, -2, -3, -4. So if I do 1 over -1, it's just going to take that and make it stretch the whole way across. So then I could do the same with my footer, which is stuck on something like that. I could say that my footer grid column of 1 over -1. And now it's going to stretch the whole way on the bottom. You can see that that empty space issue we had before is solved. Flexbox would also solve this, but we don't have any empty white space, even though my columns are really narrow. Now there's a lot more to grid than this. There's not just these -1, 1 things, and if you're looking at this going, that's kind of confusing. As I mentioned, I do have videos that go more in depth to it, but we can actually give these numbers, we can give them names. We can use their development tools to see our grids and see the lines and see where things are lining up, especially in Firefox, which is by far the best one for the grid inspector. I can make areas that look at all of that, and I have tutorials on all of these, and they just make layout. Grid has made layout something that's a lot more accessible and a lot easier to understand, in my opinion. There are some things to learn with it as far as, this whole grid template columns and grid column and grid row, and There's a lot of different properties to learn for it, but you can start making simple layouts with it almost right away, and the more you play with it, the more awesome you'll see it is very, very quickly. So with all those options, what should you be using today? Grid is sort of the layout tool that it's made for layout. It's the first one we have for layout, so I'd encourage you to learn it, and it is where things are going to be going. Flexbox isn't dead though. A lot of people make fun of Flexbox. There's people who hate on Flexbox a lot. It works super well with Grid, so they're both definitely worth understanding and learning. Floats still have their purpose, but we can actually go back to using them for their purpose, which is really cool and fun. Now, a big question comes up though, and a really important question, which is browser support. Grid is new, it's awesome, it does everything we hoped and dreamed that layouts in CSS could do, but it doesn't have full browser support. Now, that's a big topic of conversation, and something else I have a bit of an opinion on, basically because I read some stuff again. So I've been inspired by others in this case, and it's a really big subject, so we're going to save that for another video. That'll be coming out next week. So where I'm going to be talking about different options we have for browser support, because there's not just one best way of handling it if you do want to be using Grid for your layouts, because we still have to deal with Internet Explorer and stuff. Now, before I go, I want to know what you think of Flexbox and Grid. Have you started using Grid in production sites? Have you practiced Grid? Are you learning Grid? Do you still do float-based layouts? If so, why are you still using them? Is it because the clients need that? They have some legacy browsers that they need to support, or something else? So I'd love to know where you're at in your current journey, what you've learned, where you're going, and all of that. So please share down in the comments below. Before we go, please consider subscribing to this channel. It lets YouTube know that you like the stuff that I am producing, so I'd really encourage it. It helps other people know about it. So hit that subscribe button if you do like content like this, and there will be a video every single week that will just bring you some cool CSS, HTML, sometimes some JavaScript stuff, so please do consider subscribing. A big thank you to my patrons for making all of this possible. You guys are amazing. Your support is one of the things that helps me keep going with this channel, so thank you so much for that support. If you'd be curious about learning more about Patreon, there is a link down in the description below where you can find out more about that. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.